A lot of people don't fully appreciate that what they are being told is journalism is actually
pure activism.
Viva Frei, Montreal litigator turned YouTuber, and Winnie the Westie for his afternoon nap.
You gonna sleep?
And reading through the news today, I fully appreciated that a lot of people don't necessarily understand that what they are being told is journalism is in fact pure activism. And yes, for those of you out there saying hashtag confession through projection, I say this with the requisite degree of insight and self-reflection. I do not consider myself to be a journalist. I do not consider myself to be an activist. I consider myself to be an analyst. That being said, I can appreciate there are people out there who think that I am also an activist analyst. I appreciate the differing opinions. I just happen to think that I am not that, but I say this all with a sufficient degree of insight and self-reflection. Now, what brought about all of this reflection and self-reflection? For those of you who may not know, for the one person out there in the world who may not know, we are now entering day 17 of the Derek Chauvin trial. And for the one person out there who is living so far off the grid, he or she does not know who Derek Chauvin is. Derek Chauvin is one of the 4 ex-Minneapolis police officers who was charged in the death of George Floyd, which led to months of rioting. 4 police officers were charged, but Derek Chauvin is the first of those 4 police officers to stand trial, and we are now entering day 17 of that trial. Now, I am not doing daily coverage of the trial. I am doing weekly discussions of it with Robert Barnes during our live streams every Sunday. If you want amazing daily coverage, check out R&R Law Group. Robert Gruler has been doing a great job. Nate Brody is putting out videos on the subject as well, as is Uncivil Law. So while today's vlog is focused around the Derek Chauvin trial, we are going to discuss it. The emphasis here really is on identifying journalism versus identifying activist journalism. Now, for those of you who may not know, the Derek Chauvin trial is in fact being broadcast live on television and on the internet. It is fascinating to watch. I've been watching on and off since the jury selection and now into the trial itself. And although it is being aired live on the television, if anybody still watches that, and on the internet, only 2 reporters apparently are allowed into the actual courtroom to do some reporting. And one of those reporters is a CNN reporter named Sarah Sidner. Prior to this trial, I didn't actually know who Sarah Sidner was, but I saw one of her tweets appear on my Twitter timeline, probably because Brian Stetler liked it or retweeted it, and I saw her tweet about her being one of the 2 journalists allowed in the courtroom to report, and I said, whoa, I think we might be heading into some journalistic activism right here. Sarah Sidner at Sarah Sidner CNN. Heading inside courtroom for the first time today for the Derek Chauvin trial. Most of us have watched from our screens outside. My nerves are shot. Only 2 reporters are allowed inside court. It's our job to send notes on what you can't see to hundreds of journalists.
Pray for me.
Now, I'm not trying to be mean, sassy, snarky, or anything, and there is no but to that. I read that tweet and it brought to mind Poe's Law, and if any of you don't know what Poe's Law is, I'm going to screenshot and explain it right now. Poe's Law is an adage of internet culture stating that without a clear indicator of the author's intent, it is impossible to create a parody of extreme views so obviously exaggerated that it cannot be mistaken by some readers for a sincere expression of the views being parodied. Now, for those of you who may be new to the internet, for right or for wrong, for good or for bad, people on the internet have the tendency of using the pray for me in a sarcastic or ironic way, and on first reading, I wasn't sure how Sarah Sidner was using it. So I scrolled through her Twitter feed, and yeah, it seemed that she was using the pray for me in a non-ironic, serious manner. Now, I am not much of the praying type, although I have total respect for people who believe in the power of prayer. I do believe in the power of energy, just not necessarily religious type prayer, but I understand that Sarah Sidner is going to be under a lot of pressure. I just think pray for me is a little exaggerated for what she's being called upon to do. But when I appreciated that there was nothing ironic or sarcastic in that tweet, and that you have a reporter saying, pray for me, my nerves are shot because I'm going to go into a courtroom to report, I suspected that we might be entering the realm of activist journalism. And after following the trial myself, I came across another tweet from Sarah Sidner which confirmed, yes, we are in the realm of activist journalism. Sarah Sidner at Sarah Sidner CNN. The sergeant on duty when Derek Chauvin was kneeling on George Floyd's neck said he called Chauvin because a dispatcher was concerned about what she was seeing. Ultimately, that sergeant determined Chauvin used excessive force on Floyd. Another momentous moment for the prosecution. For those of you who have been around my channel long enough, you know that I often say one of the trickiest things in reading the news is determining what is a fact versus what is an opinion. It becomes especially hard when they are infused in one and the same sentence where you have a fact that is spun with an opinion. So let's break this tweet down into 2 distinct parts. The first is the statement of fact, and the second is the statement of opinion. The sergeant on duty when Derek Chauvin was kneeling on George Floyd's neck said he called Chauvin because a dispatcher was concerned about what she was seeing is a statement of fact summarizing the the testimony. The next sentence, ultimately that sergeant determined Chauvin used excessive force on Floyd, is also a factual statement summarizing the testimony, and that is the first half of this tweet, the statements of fact. The third sentence of this tweet, however,
another momentous moment for the prosecution,
is a pure statement of opinion that is intended to spin that fact into a narrative. That type of opinionated assessment is indicative of someone who came in on Team Floyd and said, look, our team just scored a point, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. It's just not the role of a reporter. It is not the role of a reporter unless that reporter is an activist reporter. And the problem in reporting on this the way Sarah Sidner did, in my humble opinion, is that it's going to create an expectation in readers that if things don't lead to a conviction despite this slam dunk, whoa, something wrong has happened and people aren't going to understand why it happened. And just to explain the importance of nuance here, we need to go over the actual charges that Derek Chauvin is facing. Chauvin is facing 3 charges: second-degree unintentional felony murder, third-degree, quote, depraved mind, end quote, murder, and second-degree manslaughter. Quote, none of the charges require the state to prove that Derek Chauvin intentionally killed Mr. Floyd, end quote, said Rachel Moran, a professor at University of St. Thomas Law School in Minneapolis. Quote, the difference in the 3 charges is really mostly about Derek Chauvin's mental state, end quote. Now, the first charge of second-degree unintentional felony murder is particularly interesting because it requires proof of an underlying felony that ultimately leads to a death in order to result in conviction. The classic example would be committing the felony of bank robbery that leads to someone getting killed. That would be a case of felony murder. Someone gets killed in the context of the commission of a felony, you have felony murder. Now, the peculiarity here, which seems to be relatively unique to Minnesota law from what I understand, is that in Minnesota, the underlying felony that could lead to felony murder charges could itself be the underlying assault. So apparently under Minnesota law, if you can prove the felonious assault that leads to a death, you can then have a case of felony murder. The second charge of third-degree depraved mind murder, and that is actually what it's called under the law, refers to behavior that is so objectively dangerous, it is reflective of a depraved mind, and if it leads to a death, then you can have third-degree depraved mind murder. And the third charge of second-degree manslaughter is sort of lower down on the scale, and it's just behavior that was risky enough that it led to someone's death. The maximum sentence in Minnesota for second-degree murder is 40 years in prison, 25 years for third-degree murder, and 10 years for manslaughter. So here, instead of having just neutral, objective reporting on the actual testimony, you have Sarah Sidner sort of spinning this into something of a monumental admission when it's not necessarily quite that big of a deal. I am not trying to minimize it, and full disclosure so you can assess everything that I'm saying, I happen to think that Derek Chauvin is guilty of something. I don't know exactly what under the law, but I do believe he's guilty of something. But the reason why I think that this sergeant's opinion is not that much of a bombshell is, on the one hand, it is just that sergeant's ex post facto opinion.
Sir, based on your review of the body-worn camera footage, do you have an opinion as to when the restraint of Mr. Floyd should have ended in this encounter?
Yes.
What is it?
When Mr. Floyd was no longer offering up any resistance to the officers, they could have ended the restraint.
And that was after he was handcuffed and on the ground and no longer resisting?
Correct.
Thank you. I have no further questions, Your Honor.
Also, being a little more immersed in the facts of this case, knowing that it was actually Minneapolis Police Department policy to put a foot or knee on the neck of someone while you're trying to subdue them, that might change things if and when that information comes out or comes to the general public's attention. Now, there is in fact one big nuance of a detail. The Minneapolis Police Department authorized the use of a knee or a foot to the neck in order to subdue someone, but not once they had already been subdued. So this sergeant says that in his opinion, it was excessive force because Derek Chauvin ought to have removed his knee from George Floyd's neck after George Floyd was handcuffed and subdued, and I agree. Why this isn't the bombshell Sarah Sidner depicted it to be in that tweet is because you still have to prove that that was causally related to George Floyd's death. Now, that causal connection might seem like common sense to a lot of people out there, especially to those who don't have all of the facts of the case. And there were some facts that came out of the testimony that Sarah Sidner did not report on that might attenuate people's expectations of a result in this case. The potentially lethal levels of drugs in George Floyd's body at the time, the fact that he had apparently in the past tried to swallow drugs to avoid getting caught, which landed him in the hospital for a near overdose.
Mr. Bravender, have you, in your experience, ever responded to a scene of someone under the influence of methamphetamines?
Yes.
Do methamphetamines cause that same restriction in the eyeballs?
My understanding, no.
And in fact dilates them, correct?
Yes.
Did you also check the individual, Mr. Floyd's pupils?
I did.
And what did you determine at that point?
They were large, dilated.
So you determined that his pupils were large and dilated. What about the pulse?
I did not palpate a pulse.
This is not a question of victimizing the victim. His criminal history, as far as I am concerned, is totally irrelevant to what occurred. The only question is whether or not his conduct the day of contributed to what occurred. Or to put it somewhat more legally, whether or not his conduct on the day of the events could cause reasonable doubt which might lead to an acquittal of Derek Chauvin. And again, it's not a question of reporting on these facts in a way to indicate which team you are on. It's a question of reporting on these facts so as to present the information, give it to the people out there so they don't have unreasonable expectations of an outcome. Regardless of the outcome in this case, it is going to be a divisive outcome, and it is important that people are sufficiently properly educated so that they don't have unrealistic expectations, and that is the job of responsible reporting. It is going to be a long trial. There are going to be lots of twists and turns. Now, I'm not going to be doing daily coverage of this. Other people are doing it better than I could, but I will be doing the weekly live stream with Robert Barnes where we will be talking about this in ways that nobody else does. So if you like my videos, you like my content, please be sure to like, share, subscribe, hit the notification bell, and drop a comment in the comment section below because it feeds the algorithm.
Please, sir, I want some more.
If you want to support the channel, all of these support links are in the pinned comment. We've got PayPal, Patreon, subscribe to our YouTube membership. Robert Barnes and I have a page on Locals. It is called vivabarneslaw.locals.com. All of my content is also on Rumble, but more important than any of that, take care of yourselves, check in on friends and family, and make sure everyone around you is doing well. And now you know your vlog. Peace out. Booyah.